Captain Vexithara gripped the command chair as another explosion rocked the bridge of the Star Render. Red warning lights bathed her chitinous face in an eerie glow, while alarms screamed throughout the massive destroyer. The Void Marauders had struck without warning, emerging from hyperspace like ghosts and tearing into her ship with plasma cannons that could melt through Alliance armor like butter. "Hull breach on Deck 7, shouted her tactical officer, his 6 arms dancing across multiple control panels. "Emergency barriers are holding, but barely." Vexithara's compound eyes tracked the damage reports flooding her screens. The exotic matter drives, the heart of any Alliance warship, were hemorrhaging energy. Purple flames danced along the ship's spine where the Marauders' weapons had punched through the quantum shielding. Without those drives, they were stranded in dead space. "Navigation, how long until we reach the nearest repair facility?" she demanded. Her navigator's antennae twitched nervously. "Captain, Starbase Zephyr is 3 hyperspace jumps from our current position. But our drives are failing fast. I estimate complete power loss in 6 hours." The bridge fell silent except for the persistent wail of emergency klaxons. 3 jumps would take at least 8 hours, assuming they could even manage 1 jump with their damaged systems. Vexithara had commanded destroyers for over 2 decades, surviving battles that had claimed entire fleets. She knew a death sentence when she heard one. "Captain," her communications officer spoke up, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "I'm detecting a response to our distress beacon. It's coming from the Sol system." Every head on the bridge turned toward him. The Sol system meant only one thing in this sector of space: humans. Primitive, backward humans who had barely crawled out of their home system and were considered little more than a curiosity by most galactic civilizations. "Are you certain?" Vexithara asked, though she already knew the answer. Her communications officer was too professional to make such a mistake. "Yes, Captain. Luna Station is offering emergency docking and repair services. They're transmitting coordinates now." A collective shudder ran through the bridge crew. Human technology was centuries behind Alliance standards. Their ships were crude metal constructs held together with welds and bolts, powered by primitive fusion reactors that the Alliance had abandoned millennia ago. The idea of trusting their lives to human engineers was terrifying. "Captain," her first officer leaned close, lowering his voice. "Surely we can make it to Starbase Zephyr. Human facilities are inadequate for Alliance vessels. They won't even understand our basic systems." Vexithara looked at her screens again. Another power coupling had just failed, sending cascading failures through the ship's secondary systems. The artificial gravity flickered, causing loose equipment to float momentarily before crashing back down. Time was running out faster than she had hoped. "Sir, we're losing containment in the exotic matter chambers," her chief engineer reported over the comm system. "If those chambers breach, the explosion will vaporize everything within 50 kilometers." The decision made itself. Vexithara's mandibles clicked together in the Alliance gesture of grim determination. She had sworn an oath to protect her crew, even if it meant swallowing her pride and trusting their lives to primitive humans. "Set course for Luna Station," she ordered. "Maximum power to engines." The Star Render limped through space, trailing debris and exotic energy discharges. As they approached the Sol system, Vexithara could see Luna Station through the main view screen. It was smaller than she had expected, a collection of spinning wheels and docking arms that looked fragile compared to the massive Alliance structures she was used to. Li Hyun floated in the observation deck of Luna Station, magnetic, boots keeping him anchored to the deck as he watched the alien destroyer approach. Even damaged, the ship was magnificent. Its biomechanical hull seemed to flow like liquid metal, and the exotic energy patterns dancing along its surface were beyond anything in human textbooks. "Boss, that thing is huge," Kim Nari said as she joined him at the observation window. "And those energy readings are off the charts. Are we really qualified to work on something like that?" Lee studied the approaching vessel with professional interest. The damage was extensive, but he could see patterns in the destruction. Weapon impacts, system failures, and cascade damage from primary systems feeding into secondary ones. It was complex, but not incomprehensible. "Kim, remember when everyone said we couldn't fix the Martian orbital platform Because it used quantum processors? He asked, without taking his eyes off the alien ship. Yeah, and we figured it out anyway. This is just another puzzle, but bigger and more interesting. Lee grinned and pushed off from the window, floating toward the communication panel. Emergency Bay 3 is our largest dock. Start prepping it for a wounded giant. As the Star Render slowly maneuvered toward the docking bay, both human and alien crews prepared for an encounter that would change everything they thought they knew about each other. Captain Vexithara's 4 eyes widened in absolute terror as she watched Lee Hyun slice through her ship's quantum flux regulator with what looked like an oversized blowtorch. Sparks flew in brilliant arcs, and the smell of burning exotic metals filled the repair bay. Her translator was working overtime, trying to process the stream of panicked clicks and hisses escaping her mandibles. "Stop! Stop this madness!" she shrieked, her chitinous arms flailing. "That component costs more than your entire station." Lee didn't even look up from his work. The cutting tool in his hands hummed with energy as he carefully separated the damaged sections from the pristine ones. "Relax, Captain, I know what I'm doing." "You're butchering a masterpiece of Alliance engineering." Vexithara turned to her first officer, who stood nearby, looking equally horrified. "Commander Korthak, they're destroying systems that took our greatest minds 3 decades to develop." The human engineer finally paused and lifted his protective visor. "Captain, with respect, your greatest minds designed this thing to work perfectly under perfect conditions. But space isn't perfect, and neither are battles." Across the repair bay, Kim Nari was elbow-deep in the ship's power distribution network. She had removed panels that were never meant to be opened, exposing a maze of crystalline conduits and biomechanical nerve clusters that pulsed with their own inner light. What she was doing looked like technological surgery performed by a barbarian. "Your exotic matter containment keeps failing because it's too rigid," Kim called out, not bothering to extract herself from the ship's mechanical guts. "Every time you take damage, these systems lock up instead of adapting. We're adding some flexibility to prevent cascade failures." Vexithara's translator made confused beeping sounds. "Flexibility? In a containment system, that's impossible. Exotic matter requires absolute precision, perfect containment fields, and quantum-level stability." Kim's head popped out from the access panel, her hair messy and her face streaked with some kind of glowing fluid. "Says who?" "Says every physicist in the galaxy." Vexithara's voice rose to a near shriek. "You cannot simply add flexibility to quantum containment." "Watch me," Kim grinned and disappeared back into the ship's mechanical maze. The sound of heavy machinery echoed from beneath the destroyer as Park Dong-ho worked on the ship's primary manifold. The massive alien vessel shuddered slightly as he made adjustments to systems that Alliance engineers would never dare touch without months of preparation and computer modeling. "What is he doing down there?" Commander Korthak whispered, his own translator struggling with the mixture of fear and fascination in his voice. As if summoned by the question, Park rolled out from under the ship on a wheeled platform, completely covered in various lubricants and coolants. His coveralls were stained with fluids that glowed in colors that didn't exist in human visual spectrum. In his grease-covered hands, he held what appeared to be a piece of scrap metal that had been roughly welded into an intricate shape. "Found your problem," Park announced cheerfully, holding up the improvised component. "Your primary manifold was designed by someone who never actually had to fix one in the field. Beautiful engineering, but completely impractical." Vexithara stared at the crude-looking piece of metal. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. What is that thing?" "A bypass valve with built-in pressure regulation," Park said, wiping his hands on his already filthy coveralls. "Your original system was so precisely calibrated that any damage would shut down the entire power grid. This little beauty will keep your engines running even if half your ship gets blown off." "That's not possible," Commander Korthak protested. "Our simulations show that any deviation from optimal parameters will cause catastrophic failure." Park shrugged and began installing his improvised component into the ship's systems. "Your simulations assume everything works perfectly, but in real life things break. Systems fail and you need equipment that can handle the unexpected. Lee finished cutting away the damaged sections of the quantum flux regulator and began welding in replacement parts that looked nothing like the original components. Instead of the elegant crystalline matrices favored by Alliance technology, he was installing blocky metal housings with visible cooling vanes and manual adjustment ports. "This is barbaric," Vexthara muttered, watching her beautiful ship being transformed into what looked like a patchwork of human engineering. "You're turning a work of art into a crude machine." "Art is nice to look at," Lee replied, his welding, torch-casting dancing shadows on the repair bay walls. "But when you're bleeding atmosphere and your enemies are shooting at you, you want something that works, not something that's pretty." Kim emerged from the power systems with a satisfied expression, her arms covered in biomechanical fluid that sparkled like liquid starlight. "Captain, your power efficiency just increased by 20%. These new routing systems will automatically compensate for damage and maintain power flow even under combat conditions." "But how?" Vexthara demanded. "Alliance engineers spend years learning to work with these systems." "That's your problem right there," Park said, sliding back under the ship with another improvised component. "You spent so much time learning the right way to do things that you forgot there might be better ways." The alien captain watched in stunned silence as the three humans continued their work, treating her sophisticated destroyer like a complex but comprehensible puzzle rather than the technological marvel it was supposed to be. Captain Vexthara stood frozen in the repair bay, staring at the readouts on her personal scanner. The numbers made no sense. According to every instrument she carried, her ship was now performing beyond factory specifications, not just repaired, but actually improved. "This cannot be accurate," she muttered, running the diagnostic for the fourth time. The results remained the same. Power efficiency had jumped 30% above baseline. Engine output was running smoother than the day her ship had rolled out of the Alliance shipyards. Lee Hyun approached, wiping his hands on a rag stained with exotic coolants. His human coveralls were a patchwork of burns, grease stains, and what looked like crystallized plasma residue. Despite his crude appearance, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Your plasma flow was all wrong," he explained, pointing to a section of the ship where new conduits ran along the hull like metallic veins. "The original designers routed everything through the primary channels, but that created bottlenecks. We added these secondary pathways to distribute the load more evenly." Vexthara's mandibles clicked in confusion. "But those channels are not in our specifications. They do not exist in any Alliance blueprint." "They do now," Kim Nari called out cheerfully from where she was installing what appeared to be additional shield generators. "We also upgraded your defensive grid. These new emitters will create overlapping fields that can absorb twice as much damage as your original system." The alien captain approached the new installations with growing amazement. The shield emitters were clearly human-designed, bulky and inelegant compared to Alliance technology. But when she ran her scanner over them, the energy readings were incredible. Each emitter was producing output levels that should have required components 3 times their size. "How is this possible?" she asked, running her clawed hand along one of the new devices. "These generators are smaller than ours, yet they produce more power." Park Dong-ho emerged from an access tunnel, carrying what looked like another improvised component. "Alliance tech is built for perfection," he explained, setting down his equipment. "Every component is precisely calibrated, beautifully designed, and works exactly as intended. The problem is that makes them fragile." He picked up a piece of Alliance circuitry that had been damaged in the attack. The crystalline matrix was cracked, its biomechanical components withered and dark. "When this fails, the whole system shuts down. Our stuff might not be as pretty, but it's built to keep working even when half of it is destroyed." Vexthara watched as Park installed his new component into her ship's targeting system. The device looked rough, with exposed wiring and manual adjustment knobs that would have horrified any Alliance engineer. But when he activated it, her targeting scanners immediately became more responsive and accurate. "We also reinforced your hull structure," Kim added, pointing to new support struts that ran along the ship's interior. Your original framework was designed to distribute stress evenly, which works great until you take battle damage. These new struts will redirect stress around damaged areas, so one hull breach won't compromise your entire structural integrity. The modifications were everywhere Vexithara looked. The humans had not simply repaired her ship, they had reimagined it where Alliance engineers would have replaced each damaged component with an identical part. The humans had analyzed why each component failed and designed better alternatives. Your weapon systems were interesting, Lee commented, leading her to the destroyer's main gun turrets. Powerful but inefficient, we added these heat exchangers and modified the charging cycles. You can now fire continuously for twice as long before overheating. Vexithara examined the modifications with growing wonder. The heat exchangers were crude-looking devices that used simple convection cooling instead of the sophisticated quantum thermal management systems preferred by Alliance technology, yet they worked better than the originals. We found 17 different single points of failure in your original design, Kim explained, showing Vexithara a holographic display of the ship's systems. Any one of these components could disable your entire vessel if damaged. We've added backup systems, alternate pathways, and redundant controls for everything critical. The hologram showed a ship that was no longer the elegant, streamlined vessel she had commanded for years. The human modifications created a web of redundancy and resilience that transformed her destroyer from a precision instrument into something far more robust. I do not understand, Vexithara said finally. Why do you do this? Your contract was simply to repair the damage caused by the Void Marauders. Why not simply restore what was broken? Lee looked at her with genuine surprise, as if the question made no sense, because that would be wasteful. If we're going to spend time fixing something, we might as well make it better than it was before. Otherwise, what's the point? But the additional work, the extra materials, the time, Vexithara protested. You are not being compensated for these improvements. Park laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the vast repair bay. Captain, we're engineers. Making things work better is what we do. It's not about compensation, it's about pride in the work. Kim nodded enthusiastically. Besides, now we know how Alliance technology works. That knowledge alone is worth more than any payment you could offer. Vexithara realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic civilization. These humans were not just technicians following repair protocols. They were innovators who saw every problem as an opportunity to create something better. Her ship was no longer just repaired, it was evolved. The hyperspace communication networks buzzed with impossible stories. Across 17 different star systems, alien captains shared tales that sounded like fantasy. A human repair station that could fix anything. Engineers who performed miracles with primitive tools. Ships that emerged stronger than when they arrived. Captain Mordak of the Silicon Confederacy didn't believe the stories until his ship's quantum computer cores began dying one by one. The virus was unlike anything his species had encountered before. It ate through their crystalline processes, like acid, leaving behind corrupted data and system failures that spread faster than his technicians could contain them. Captain, we've lost another core, his chief engineer reported, his metallic voice crackling with static interference. The virus is adapting to our countermeasures faster than we can deploy them. The Silicon Confederacy had built their entire civilization around perfect computational systems. Their ships were essentially flying computers, with every function controlled by quantum processors that could calculate billions of variables simultaneously. But this virus was turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Sir, there's a human station in the Sol system offering repair services, his communications officer suggested hesitantly. I know it sounds desperate, but... 3 days later, Mordak's vessel limped into Lunar Station's docking bay. The ship looked like it was dying from the inside out, with displays flickering randomly and systems shutting down without warning. Park Dong-ho took one look at the infected. Quantum cores and scratched his head. Never seen anything like this, he admitted, watching the virus code scroll across the alien displays in patterns that hurt human eyes to follow. But I've got an idea. Instead of trying to fight the virus directly, Park designed something completely new. Human-built firewalls that didn't try to stop the virus, but instead contained it in isolated sections where it could cause no harm. Even more impressive, these firewalls learned from each attack, adapting and evolving alongside the virus. Your virus thinks it's smart, Park explained to the amazed Silicon captain, but our firewalls are smarter. They don't just block attacks, they study them and get stronger. Within hours, Mordak's ship was not only virus-free, but more secure than any Confederacy vessel had ever been. The human-designed security systems were crude by Silicon standards, but they worked in ways that quantum computing had never achieved. Word spread faster after that. Commander Zelnara of the Crystalline Republic arrived next, her ship's hull fractured in patterns that defied physics. The damage looked like frozen lightning, spreading through her vessel's crystal structure in fractal patterns that continued growing even after the original attack. Our best engineers say it's impossible to repair, she explained to Kim Nari, gesturing at the spiderweb cracks that covered her ship. The damage propagates through our crystal matrix faster than we can seal it. Kim studied the fractal damage with fascination rather than fear. She had never worked with crystalline technology before, but she approached it like any other engineering problem. The solution she developed was brilliant in its simplicity. Your crystal structure resonates at specific frequencies, she explained, setting up equipment that looked like a cross between a welding torch and a musical instrument. Instead of fighting the fractal patterns, we're going to use harmonic resonance to guide them into self-healing configurations. The repair process looked more like a concert than engineering work. Kim played harmonic frequencies through the damaged crystal, causing the fractal patterns to realign themselves into stronger, more stable configurations. Not only did the damage heal, but the hull became more resilient than its original design. "It's impossible," Zelnara whispered, as she watched her ship's crystal hull literally sing itself back to health. "You've turned our greatest weakness into a strength." The success stories multiplied rapidly. Captain Thexara brought a hive ship with biological computer systems that were slowly dying of an unknown disease. Li Hyun treated the ship like a patient rather than a machine, developing medical treatments that cured the illness and boosted the biological system's performance. Commander Voxhull arrived with a plasma-based vessel that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The dimensional anchor had been damaged, causing the ship to phase in and out of reality unpredictably. Park designed a new anchor system using modified human navigation equipment that not only stabilized the vessel, but allowed controlled dimensional shifts for tactical advantages. Each new arrival brought problems that had stumped the galaxy's best engineers: quantum parasites that fed on energy systems, temporal anomalies that age ship components at different rates, gravity wells that had become permanently attached to vessel hulls, space barnacles that couldn't be removed without destroying the ships they clung to. The humans tackled each challenge with the same fearless creativity, often inventing entirely new fields of engineering on the spot. They didn't have the advanced knowledge of other civilizations, but they had something more valuable: the ability to think outside conventional limitations. "It's remarkable," Captain Vexithara explained to a gathering of alien commanders in Lunar Station's observation lounge. "They don't just repair ships, they reimagine them entirely." The lounge had become an unofficial meeting place for alien captains, waiting for repairs. Representatives from dozens of species shared stories and marveled at human ingenuity. Some had been waiting months for their turn in the repair bays, but none complained. The results were worth any wait. "My ship now performs 40% better than factory specifications," Captain Mordak reported. "The humans didn't just remove the virus, they made our entire computer network more efficient. They turned our greatest design flaw into an advantage," added Commander Zelnara. "Our crystal hulls are now self-repairing." Lunar Station had become the galaxy's most sought-after repair facility, with waiting lists stretching into the following year. Ships arrived daily from across known space, carrying problems that seemed impossible to solve. But the humans approached, each challenge with the same confident optimism, treating impossible as just another word for interesting. 6 months after her first encounter with human engineering, Captain Vexithara found herself returning to Lunar Station. This time, her ship was in perfect condition. The star render hummed with efficiency, its human-modified systems performing flawlessly. She wasn't here for repairs. She was here to understand something that had been bothering her for months. The question that haunted her was simple. How did these primitive humans consistently solve problems that stumped the galaxy's most advanced civilizations? She found Li Hyun exactly where she expected him to be, deep in his workshop surrounded by scattered components and half-finished projects. But what she saw made her freeze in absolute horror. The human engineer was deliberately destroying a perfectly functional hyperdrive motivator, one of the most expensive and sophisticated pieces of technology in known space. "What in the void are you doing?" Vexithara shrieked, her four eyes wide with shock. Li looked up from where he was carefully dissecting the component with what appeared to be a modified plasma cutter. The hyperdrive motivator, worth more than most planets' annual budgets, lay in smoking pieces across his workbench. "Learning," he replied casually, poking at one of the damaged sections with a probe. "I want to understand exactly why this part fails when ships take heavy battle damage. The manufacturer's specs don't tell the whole story." "But it was perfectly functional." Vexithara's voice rose to a pitch that made several nearby humans wince. "That component could have powered a small fleet," Li smiled, and held up a twisted piece of exotic metal. "Functional for now, sure. But what happens when it takes a direct hit from enemy fire? What happens when the quantum field fluctuates beyond normal parameters? What happens when space-time itself gets bent during an emergency jump?" He set down the ruined component and picked up another identical unit from a nearby shelf. "This is the third one I've taken apart this week. Each failure teaches me something new about how to build a better replacement." Vexithara stared at the shelf, which contained dozens of expensive components in various states of destruction. "You're deliberately destroying technology that took other species centuries to develop." "Not destroying," Kim Nari called out from across the workshop, where she was apparently doing something similar to a quantum processor array. "We're reverse engineering everything to understand how it really works, not just how it's supposed to work." The alien captain watched in fascination and horror as Kim subjected the processor to increasingly extreme conditions. She overloaded it with power, exposed it to radiation, froze it with liquid nitrogen and heated it until it glowed. Each test revealed new failure points and limitations. "Your species build things to work perfectly under ideal conditions," Kim explained, making notes as the processor finally failed catastrophically. "But space isn't ideal. Combat isn't perfect. We need to understand how things break so we can design systems that keep working even when everything goes wrong." Park Dong-ho emerged from a testing chamber where he had been subjecting various alien technologies to simulated battle conditions. His hair was singed, his coveralls were smoking, and he wore the expression of someone who had just learned something incredibly valuable. "The Crystalline Republic's shield generators are amazing," he announced, holding up the charred remains of what had once been a sophisticated defensive system. "Right up until you hit them with plasma fire and gravitic distortion at the same time, then they shatter like glass. So now we know how to build better ones," Li added, gesturing to a workbench where several human-designed shield generators were being assembled. "These might not be as elegant as the originals, but they won't fail under combat stress." Vexithara began to understand. Every other species in the galaxy had reached technological plateaus. They had perfected their designs over millennia, creating elegant solutions that worked flawlessly within established parameters. Once something was perfected, it became doctrine. Engineers followed established protocols, built to proven specifications, and repaired things according to standard procedures. But humans were different. They hadn't been building starships long enough to develop rigid doctrines. They didn't have millennia of established procedures holding them back. They approached every problem with fresh eyes and an almost insane willingness to experiment. "We made first contact with galactic civilization only 50 years ago," Li continued, now working on what appeared to be a completely new type of hyperdrive component. "We don't have thousands of years of conventional wisdom telling us what's impossible." "That's your secret weapon," Kim added with a grin. "We're too primitive to know what can't be done, so we just try everything until something works." Park laughed as he started another destructive test on an alliance power coupling. Every other species has reached the point where their technology is so advanced that only specialists can work on it. But we treat everything like a puzzle that can be solved with the right combination of creativity and stubbornness. Vexithara watched the three humans continue their work, destroying and rebuilding technology with casual confidence that would have terrified engineers from any other species. They weren't bound by the limitations that constrained everyone else in the galaxy. They didn't know enough to be afraid of breaking things that couldn't be fixed. "We're not advanced enough to know what's impossible," Kim had told her months. Ego and now Vexithara finally understood what that meant. In a galaxy where every other civilization had reached technological maturity, humans remained perpetual students, always learning, always experimenting, always pushing boundaries that others considered absolute. Their primitive status wasn't a weakness to overcome, it was their greatest strength. While other species had perfected their technologies and crystallized their thinking, humans remained fluid, adaptable, and endlessly creative. They saw every malfunction as a learning opportunity rather than a problem to be fixed according to standard procedures. As Vexithara prepared to leave Lunar Station, she realized that the galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations had become dependent on these chaotic, unpredictable humans. In a universe of perfect conformity and established procedures, humanity's reckless creativity had become the most valuable resource in known space. The primitives had become the galaxy's most essential engineers, not despite their unconventional methods, but because of them. The ND.